Nobody was watching. That is the part that still stays with me after all these years. Nobody was watching, and I did it anyway. My name is Harold. I am 74 years old, and the moment I am most proud of in my entire life is one I have never spoken about out loud until now. I spent most of my working years as a mid-level accountant at a regional manufacturing firm in Ohio. Not a glamorous life by anyone's measure. I was not the kind of man who gave speeches or received awards. I coached my son's little league team for 3 seasons. I showed up to every school play my daughter was ever in. I mowed the lawn on Saturdays and went to church on Sundays when my wife Margaret could convince me. A quiet life, an ordinary life. The kind of life that does not make for interesting conversation at dinner parties. And for most of it, I was perfectly content with that. But there is something that happens to a man when he gets older. The noise starts to settle. The things you spent decades chasing, the promotions, the opinions of neighbors, the feeling that you were building towards something visible and measurable, they lose their weight somehow. And what is left once all of that fades is just the truth of who you actually were when it mattered. I want to tell you about a Tuesday afternoon in March of 1987. I was 40 years old. Margaret and I had just moved into the house we would spend the rest of our lives in. The kids were young. Money was tighter than I let her know, and I was 3 weeks into a new position at the firm, still trying to prove myself to a man named Gerald Whitmore, who was the kind of supervisor who made you feel that your job was always slightly in danger, even on the days you performed well. Gerald had asked me to finalize a quarterly reconciliation report, a routine task. I had done dozens of them over the years. But somewhere in the middle of going through those figures, I found something that was not supposed to be there. A reclassification of expenses, small enough to overlook, large enough to matter. It had been buried carefully, not sloppily, which told me it had not been a mistake. I sat in that office alone for a long time. The building had mostly emptied out. It was past 6 in the evening. The cleaning crew had not yet come through, so it was just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights and that single sheet of paper sitting on the desk in front of me. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment because I think it is important. I was not filled with some immediate, clear sense of righteous purpose. I was afraid. I was a 40-year-old man with a mortgage and 2 children and a wife who trusted me to keep things together, and I was sitting in front of something that was going to make my life significantly harder if I chose to see it. That is the truth. The easy thing, the invisible thing, was to let it pass through my hands without comment. To finalize the report, close the folder, and go home to dinner. Nobody would have known. That is the sentence I kept turning over in my mind. Nobody would have known. There was no colleague waiting for my decision. There was no camera, no audience, no version of this moment that was ever going to be visible to anyone. It was just me and a choice in an empty room. I picked up the phone and I called Gerald at home. I do not remember exactly what I said. I remember that my voice was steadier than I expected it to be. I told him what I had found. I told him I could not sign off on the report as it stood. I told him I wanted to handle it quietly and correctly, and that I was not interested in creating a problem for anyone, but that I also could not pretend I had not seen what I saw. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me to come in early the next morning. I drove home that night not knowing whether I still had a job. I did not tell Margaret. I sat at the dinner table and listened to my daughter talk about a science project and my son complain about his math teacher, and I kept thinking this might be the last normal evening for a while. As it turned out, the matter was handled internally. I kept my job. Gerald never spoke warmly to me after that, but he never moved against me either. The reclassification was corrected. No one outside a small circle ever knew it had happened, and my name was certainly not attached to any outcome that anyone would call heroic. There was no acknowledgement, no quiet handshake from a senior partner, nothing that would ever appear in any record of my career. Life simply continued. And that is exactly the point. I have received a small number of recognitions over the years, a plaque when I retired, a few kind words at a going-away lunch. My children grew up and became good people, and I take some quiet credit for that. Margaret and I built a life together that I am genuinely grateful for. These things matter to me, they do. But none of them are the moment I return to when I ask myself who I actually am. The moment I return to is that Tuesday in March. The empty room, the fluorescent lights, the phone I did not have to pick up. There is something I have come to believe, and I offer it only as something I have lived, not as advice. I think most of us spend our lives performing some version of ourselves for an audience, even when we believe we are acting freely. We make decisions with at least one eye on how they will be seen, how they will be remembered, what story they will allow us to tell about ourselves. And that is not entirely dishonest, that is just human. But I think there are a small number of moments in a life, maybe only a handful, where the audience disappears completely, where it is only you and the truth of what you are about to do. And I think whoever you are in those moments is closer to your actual character than anything else you will ever show the world. I did not pick up that phone because someone was watching. I did not do it to protect a legacy or build a reputation or to be the kind of man my children would admire. I did it because I was alone and I still could not make myself do otherwise. And for reasons I find difficult to fully explain, that has been enough for me to live on for 37 years. I am 74 years old. I have had a quiet life. And the truest thing I have ever done, nobody saw. I hope somewhere in your own life you have had a moment like that. And if you have not yet, I hope when it comes, you will know it for what it is.